From the beginning of the case against the Southern Poverty Law Center, All Rise News has been following this very closely, and there's been an important development in the case concerning the SPLC's motion for vindictive prosecution. Last week, a federal judge denied that motion that was brought by the SPLC, and it cited many of the things that have happened since their indictment, including Donald Trump's rants against the SPLC, including on CBS with Norah O'Donnell, where Donald Trump said that there aren't allegations against the SPLC at all, but facts, declaring, in effect, the SPLC guilty long in advance of any trial, citing statements by Todd Blanche and other senior Justice Department officials attacking the SPLC long before a single juror has received a summons to report to the Middle District of Alabama. And on top of all that, we now know earlier this year there was a whistleblower report submitted to Congressman Jamie Raskin by a prosecutor in the Middle District of Alabama who reported a pressure campaign to rush through an indictment despite serious concerns from prosecutors in that district. And today I'm going to speak to Phil Williams, investigative journalist who you've seen on this channel before, very accomplished monitor of hate groups. He has a newsletter on this Substack, Confront the Hate, and among his many accolades has been name-checked by John Oliver on HBO. Happy to speak to him again about this development. And we're going to talk through what it means that even amid this record of Trump rants, of senior Justice Department officials attacking the SPLC long before a trial, this wasn't enough to even start an investigation on whether the SPLC could prove its allegations of vindictive prosecution. So good afternoon, Phil. How's it going?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
So what is your reaction to Judge Emily Marks? She's a Trump appointee from the Middle District of Alabama, and she received all the full briefing on this vindictive prosecution motion, and late last week rejected it, finding that there wasn't even enough evidence to bring forward an investigation. What's your reaction?
Well, her ruling to me really seems like an outlier from a lot of these cases that we've seen the Department of Justice bring around the country. For example, the cases against James Comey or the Broadview Six, is it? I lose
Right.
track of that number. And where you had judges who were willing to entertain the notion that the Trump administration might be engaged in political vendettas. Here, this Judge Emily Marks, who is a Trump appointee, I never want to make too much out of that, but who is a Trump appointee, a Federalist Society member, has basically shut down every approach that the Southern Poverty Law Center has tried to make so far to attack the validity of this case. And this ruling is just the most recent example of where Judge Marks has really not even given much consideration to the arguments being made by the Southern Poverty Law Center in their attempt to get further investigation about whether this is a case of vindictive prosecution.
Right. And let's go into the case that the SPLC made. They pointed out the fact that Donald Trump went on CBS speaking to Norah O'Donnell about the case in the extended 60 Minutes interview and went off in declaring them guilty long before any trial. That Todd Blanche went on Fox and claimed that made allegations that he had to later walk back, claiming that there was no evidence that the SPLC ever cooperated with the federal government, which we know is not true. Ultimately, in Judge Marks's ruling, she discounts that, saying that there needs to be a direct tie to the prosecutors within the Middle District of Alabama. But when we started this video, I'd mentioned that there was, in fact, a whistleblower's report from a prosecutor inside that district who went to Congress reporting pressure to push this case forward. And it's not even mentioned anywhere in Judge Marks's ruling. What was your reaction to that piece of the puzzle, the whistleblower report, and the reasoning that there needed to be some direct proof that the prosecutors in that district had an animus against the SPLC?
Yeah, Judge Marks is very narrow in her interpretation of the case law here, very conservative in her interpretation of the case law. And, even though we have heard from the Trump administration time after time after time that the president himself is the chief law enforcement officer for the country, she, Judge Marks, really refused to consider any statements that were made from the president on down to the Department of Justice, FBI Director Kash Patel, and she basically said all of those various arguments about those statements are irrelevant because you need to have some evidence, some reason to believe that the local prosecutors were influenced. Well, part of the SPLC's argument was this whistleblower report that went to Congress, went to House Democrats, alleging that there was indeed pressure to rush this case, to indict before the case had been fully vetted and fully considered. And, you know, I read through the opinion of Judge Marks initially, and I thought, surely I didn't miss the part about the whistleblowers, and I did a control F, and there is no reference to that allegation. And so in dismissing the concerns about local prosecutors being influenced, she completely ignored the one argument by the Southern Poverty Law Center about local prosecutors being influenced. So, to me, that was certainly strange. But the whole rest of her reasoning that we cannot she cannot consider statements made by the president or the Department of Justice in trying to decide whether more of an investigation is warranted certainly struck me as strange given the history that we've seen in case after case playing out around the country where judges have said, yeah, there's something not right here. We're going to let you explore it.
Right. And we've spoken about this earlier. It is very rare for a vindictive prosecution motion to actually succeed. I have only seen one of them succeed in my career as a legal journalist, and that's in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. It's going to be challenging. I think this decision shows how challenging it is, even on a record where you have the President of the United States attacking the defendant, the Attorney General of the United States attacking the defendant, a sitting FBI director attacking the defendant. And some of what Judge Marks describes this entire campaign as, she says it's speculation and conjecture to say that that influenced the prosecution. I'm going to read a passage of her opinion. She says, the party's briefing is, like much of our modern political discourse, heavy on heated rhetoric, better suited for cable news or a podcast. It emphasizes noise over substance. After filtering out the noise, the court is left to decide only whether the government's decision to prosecute the SPLC was constitutionally impermissible. On this record, the SPLC is not entitled to discovery or dismissal of the indictment. But let's talk about the substance here. What does this portend for cases that will have allegations of vindictive prosecution? We have the Seychelles case against James Comey in North Carolina. I believe there's a pending vindictive prosecution motion in Don Lemon's case over in the Twin Cities. Does this order really show that, as you said a little bit earlier, Phil, we have seen other judges really take actions to dismiss some of these cases in the past? vindictive prosecution motions are going to be very hard as to actually succeed as a check against political targeting.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note this is the second major decision where Judge Marks has ruled against the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the first one did not get as much attention, but in that case, the Justice Department had gone out and made provably false public statements about the Southern Poverty Law Center and about their case involving the Southern Poverty Law Center. The president had said that basically Unite the Right rally, the 2017 deadly rally in Charlottesville, was all rigged by the Southern Poverty Law Center to make him look bad. The Southern Poverty Law Center took all of those statements, extrajudicial statements, and took them to the judge and said, "We need to know what the grand jury was told. We would like to get the grand jury transcripts." And so back in June, Judge Marks had overruled that motion as well. So there are all sorts of questions that I've raised at confrontthehate.com that other people have raised. Even participants in these hate groups have questioned some of the allegations. Uh, and so far, Judge Marks is just not willing to entertain anything that approaches, whether this could be, in fact, vindictive in nature.
Of course, the backdrop of the Charlottesville hate rally allegations is the controversy about Trump's own response to the Charlottesville hate rally and his attempt to rewrite the history of it. All the controversy about his remarks about very good, very fine people on both sides. And it seems like one of the parts of this case is to try to turn that history on its head and saying, oh, this was just the result of an SPLC informant. But the indictment doesn't go anywhere near that far, even if you credit the government's allegations. Isn't that a fact?
Yeah, if you read the indictment itself, a lot of what MAGA commentators were saying about the Unite the Right rally having been orchestrated by the Southern Poverty Law Center just did not hold water. It was not in the indictment itself. This was just MAGA commentators reading far more into the indictment than is actually there. And it was a case of the president himself, going on national television and reading far more into the indictment than was actually there. So there have, been all sorts of questions about how the Department of Justice has handled this case from the very beginning. And, maybe, the Southern Poverty Law Center would get, if they had the authority to take depositions and that type thing, maybe they would come up empty. Maybe they would not find any evidence that the local prosecutors were influenced. But if you look at all of the smoke that has been surrounding this case, it seems unlikely that there wasn't some sort of political pressure to bring these charges against the Southern Poverty Law Center.
And especially in the wake of that whistleblower report. One thing that did emerge over the litigation of all this is that the Southern Poverty Law Center reported what its informant was doing with the Charlottesville hate rally, which was compiling a dossier that it shared with federal law enforcement and local law enforcement so they could be prepared for the extremist figures who are on the ground in Charlottesville. And who knows how much worse it would have been but for the information compiled by that informant. I want to turn to a part of the decision where I just thought this was a Hall of Fame uh, entry for judicial euphemisms. And this
And I
is
know where you're going with this one.
this is Judge Marks characterizing Trump's statements about the case. And I talk sometimes about us being desensitized to the parade of Trump and senior Justice Department officials violating the right to a fair trial and against pretrial prejudice by making statements about the accused before a trial. Here's how Judge Marks characterizes all that. Quote, the court is similarly unpersuaded by President Trump's post-indictment statements about the SPLC. President Trump's rhetoric is rather famously wide-ranging, and he has undoubtedly been critical of the SPLC. So, any comment on the wide-ranging rhetoric and what it means that, going forward, that when the president of the United States attacks someone accused of a crime and declares that person guilty before a single jury summons has been sent in the mail, that this is the response that, President Trump has wide-ranging rhetoric. What was your response to that euphemism?
Yeah, I described that in my piece at confrontthehate.com as the crazy uncle view of the president's rantings. It is essentially she was saying, well, he says all sorts of crazy stuff. There's no evidence that the people who work for him were following those crazy notions. Again, and that goes back to this notion of, we have heard over and over that the president is actually running the Department of Justice. I think Todd Blanche in his confirmation hearings alluded to that. And so to say, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, pay no attention to the man with all the crazy rantings is certainly unusual. The other thing I would point out, and you read earlier in this conversation about her comparing the briefings to tabloid fodder. In my experience, 40 years of covering, federal courts on and off, normally you have judges who are very strict, especially with the government, that as prosecutors, you have an obligation to a higher standard to make sure that the defendant gets a fair trial. And to make sure that there are no extrajudicial statements that might prejudice that trial. Here she treats both sides with equal disdain or equal rebuke, and not, from what I can see, not really saying, okay, prosecutors, Department of Justice, you have an obligation to be better than this. And basically she faults both sides.
It's such an important point. Like, here's another passage where she has that very same line. Quote, this case typifies modern American discourse. It is unsurprising that the parties' arguments primarily comprise what has become all too common: ad hominem attacks in the form of press releases, interviews, and social media posts. And it seems to me, as I read that, it it puts two things on equal footing: the president of the United States and senior Justice Department officials trampling on the right of a fair trial by attacking the accused and opining on the guilt of an accused before a trial, and the person who's accused of a crime alleging political targeting. And it treats these things as being equal. It seems to go exactly toward what you're saying as not holding the government to a higher standard, as in fact, rating the government on a curve because of the crazy uncle theory.
Yeah, and in fact, if unless I'm mistaken, unless I've missed something, the Southern Poverty Law Center has been very restrained in their public comments. They put out a video right before the indictment came down. I think they may have put out a statement following the indictment, but the Southern Poverty Law Center has not been engaged in social media posts about this case. And so, that line that you read, really, there's only one side in this court case that has been engaged in those tactics. The other thing I think is important for us to, discuss is part of the Southern Poverty Law Center's argument was that they were targeted when they spoke up against the president's national security presidential memorandum number 7, which was widely seen as targeting progressive groups. groups. They wanted to know whether this prosecution was part of NSP M7. And then, they also argued that right after they spoke out against that memorandum, that Kash Patel, that's when he cut off ties between the FBI and the Southern Poverty Law Center. He put out a post on X that said that the Southern Poverty Law Center had, quote, even inspired violence, which is sort of reminiscent of the allegations in this indictment itself. And so there's a lot that could have been could have been potential targets for exploration that the judge is just not going to allow at this stage.
Right. And to your point about treating both sides as if they're making statements on the same level, you look at the comments of Trump and members of the Justice Department going on national TV and claiming that Charlottesville was an inside job, and going on national television with all sorts of misinformation and accusing the SPLC of inciting violence without any evidence, and that it's baseless and absurd to begin with. You know, I on the subject of what precipitated the prosecution, can you go into a little bit of the background? Obviously, when Kash Patel ended the FBI's historic cooperation with the SPLC in building cases against extremist groups, there was also the backdrop of the Charlie Kirk assassination. The SPLC had, of course, criticized Charlie Kirk for some of his rhetoric when he was alive, but the SPLC denounced Charlie Kirk's assassination, saying political violence is never the answer. But there was, for a very long time, a lot of criticism from conservatives of the SPLC because the SPLC monitored some of their allies.
That's right, and that they have the SPLC has faced criticism that from more moderate people for being a little too broad in using the word hate, and so that has engendered a lot of controversy within the conservative movement, and so again, that's part of the potential factor here. In fact, Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, if I recall her title correctly, after the indictment, said that she took this indictment of the Southern Poverty Law Center personally because of some of her friends who had been targeted by the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate watch map. So again, that points to the fact that there are people within the Trump administration who intensely dislike the Southern Poverty Law Center. And the defense attorneys were saying, we need to explore whether that's a part of this prosecution, whether this is indeed vindictive. And again, on every one of those points, whether it's the whistleblower, the whistleblower was ignored, but the president's statements, Kash Patel's statements, Harmeet Dillon's statements, in all of those, the judge says, those are completely irrelevant, and she refused to even consider them.
Right. And of course, the definition of vindictive prosecution has to do with the retaliation for protected speech or some other exercise of one's some fundamental rights, that you're being targeted because, as Harmeet Dillon expressed, they went after my friends. That if your expression is tied to the reason for your prosecution, that's what vindictive prosecution is all about. But of course, with this ruling, that is now foreclosed from the SPLC, and now they're facing trial in October. So going forward, a couple days after this ruling, the SPLC filed a new motion saying that the government has effectively refused to disclose information that they need to defend themselves at trial, including information about their historic cooperation with the FBI. Can you talk a little bit about that motion?
Yeah, that's going to be the next big one to watch, and, again, I'm not an attorney, but this one could potentially set up an appeal because it involves what they're allowed to, put into their defense, but essentially, they're saying, "We we know you have evidence that we shared this information with the FBI, that we weren't just doing it to gin up hate, which is what the Department of Justice has alleged. Uh, and the filing also indicates that the government has information in its possession that the Southern Poverty Law Center was paying taxes on these payments to informants. And so, what the Southern Poverty Law Center is saying in this new motion is, give us the stuff that we know you have that will be part of our defense. And according to the memorandum, the Department of Justice has basically just dug in and said, "Sorry, we don't have to give that to you."
Right. I see one of the commentators saying, yes, Brady material. Yes, the what the SPLC is requesting is Brady material, exonerating evidence that they want to use at trial. That as you mentioned, Phil, the heart of the government's case is the allegation that the SPLC told donors that it was fighting hate groups and dismantling hate groups, but in fact, by paying informants, they were in effect, in the words of Todd Blanche, manufacturing racism because allegedly it was in such short supply that without creating the racism through these informants, they wouldn't be able to wrangle donations to fulfill their mission. The SPLC has, of course, mocked that argument as absurd, but they are going to need to defend themselves by showing what the informants were used for, including to disrupt crimes and terrorist plots. And we've started to see indications of what the informants did to and what they shared with the FBI and what the results of that were. Do you want to go through some of that history? What did this case show about what the informants achieved?
Well, just a couple that come to mind. There was, in the case of Charlottesville, the Southern Poverty Law Center says, we gave you extensive briefings about our concerns about what was going to happen in Charlottesville, and you ignored those. But especially in this indictment, you're ignoring the role that we played about in that investigation. There's another one, as I recall, I think as a mass shooting, perhaps that was planned in Las Vegas that the Southern Poverty Law Center warned about. So that prior to this administration, there have been a years long cooperation between the Southern Poverty Law Center and law enforcement authorities, and I think that goes back to the vindictive prosecution motive that this administration came in and essentially said, you are a pariah to us. We want nothing to do with you. And so I think the Southern Poverty Law Center will have a lot to say if this goes to trial about the role that it has played in deterring violence and in making sure that cases are brought that people have been indicted and sent to prison. So that's going to be another interesting part of the trial. And I have to tell you, I would not be surprised if you don't have former Justice Department officials appearing as witnesses on behalf of the Southern Poverty Law Center.
I wouldn't be surprised by that in the least either. Just to add a couple of more details to what you were saying about some of those cases. In the case in Los Angeles of the potential terrorist attack that the SPLC informant helped disrupt, that was a case involving, on the SPLC's account, that it involved a young neo-Nazi who was going to target a synagogue and an LGBTQ bar. but they shared information with law enforcement who disrupted that crime. There was another case in Pennsylvania of an extremist who was applying for a security clearance, and that was disrupted, and the person who was applying for that security clearance was prosecuted. So it seems to me that this particular motion about what the government knew and when they knew it, to quote the Nixonian phrase, the that is at the heart of this case because the allegation is wire fraud. And if the government knew that the SPLC was using this information to disrupt these groups, and they knew it because the information was in fact used to disrupt these groups, and therefore paying these informants wasn't money laundering, it was sending payments to informants in a way to avoid detection. Uh, I think it goes to knowledge, and I see this as a very important motion about whether they can get information about what the government knew. How do you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking as you were talking about that, I know a number of people who either currently work or previously worked with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And to a person, every one of them is absolutely passionate about, trying to combat, violence, to try to avoid the kind of terrorist acts that you were discussing, they have taken this personally, and everyone that I've spoken with says yes, we have repeatedly worked with law enforcement to try to dismantle these groups, to try to keep these acts of violence from happening. So the fact that the government was sitting on this information is going to be a key part of the case. And, certainly I think the Southern Poverty Law Center has some of this evidence in its own possession, but to have it to come from the hands of the Justice Department at the same time the Justice Department is bringing this case will be critical to show the motives that are involved here.
And because of the denial of their motion to dismiss for vindictive prosecution, this case is headed for trial in October. These preliminary decisions have very important effects on what evidence they'll be able to present to a jury. We will see the future rulings that Judge Marks will make. And just to kind of tie this all together, it seems that one of the checks against a targeted or vindictive prosecution is a motion to dismiss for vindictive prosecution. We've learned in this case just how hard it is, even on a record where you have the President of the United States publicly attacking you, the Attorney General of the United States publicly attacking you, the sitting FBI director publicly attacking you, and a whistleblower report telling Congress that there's a pressure campaign to indict you. That wasn't enough on this record to even start an investigation to dismiss the case. But the other check on the system is the jury system. It's a trial, and it's these important pre-trial decisions. And I know that Phil Williams here at Confront the Hate is going to keep a close watch on this. I'm certainly going to keep a close watch on this as well for All Rise News. This case is going to go to trial in Birmingham, Alabama in October, and we're going to keep on this case. Any final thoughts about all the things we've been discussing today, Phil?
I wonder, and again, not being an attorney, but I do wonder if we might not see this motion appear one more time as we get closer to trial, and perhaps some discovery falls into the hands of the Southern Poverty Law Center. So that's the other thing I'm going to be watching for to see whether the Southern Poverty Law Center might not make one more run at this, and that will be interesting to see.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see if they file a motion for reconsideration, because this is quite a record. And just to bring things to a complete circle, as we've both witnessed throughout our careers as journalists, Vindictive prosecution motions are very, very hard to win. I've only seen it happen once in my life, but we are in unusual times. And one of the things that I take away from this is that in cases like this, in the case against James Comey, in the case against Letitia James, in the case against John Lemon, against Don Lemon, that this is a preview of how difficult this check on the system is. We'll both be paying very close attention moving forward. Thank you so much, Phil.
Absolutely. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you too. And for folks who missed any part of this conversation, take a moment to subscribe right now to All Rise News and to Phil Williams's channel, Confront the Hate. You can see the full conversation along with all of the context that we've been talking about, including the source documents, so you can be fully informed on this case and others as they move ahead. Have a good day.